Catechizing diverse learners. This is something that we're all here for. We want to learn what to do and what to think about. So we're going to bring Charleen back on. And let's start with just what would you say in an initial conversation with someone who is just getting into, this ministry, who has really no idea of what to do, or someone just interested in it?
Well, first of all, because they're listening to this webinar, I'd say keep doing what you're doing. Keep seeking out training. Talk to other catechists or other teachers that maybe are more seasoned than you are. Really get a mentor. Those are kind of just some basic tips for themselves to have a support system. And then I would say, honestly, trust God and don't be afraid. Right? Really, because if you have a group of, you've signed up, you've raised your hand, you got the good heart, you want to pass on the faith like the rest of us, but yet you're going to have, it's a universal church. So I say everybody's going to come, and we want everybody to come. And the one thing to remember is that every brain is different, and that's a good thing. So that means that each of us learns differently, we respond differently, we process differently, and some more diversely than others. Right? So some have stronger characteristics. I don't call them problems. I don't call them challenges. So to me, I observe something, right? And the other adage we often say is be curious, not judgmental. So for what we don't understand or what looks or seems different than maybe myself or what I'm familiar with, again, be curious, not judgmental. So in doing that, again, you'll already be responding to someone differently, right? Because it'll be coming more out of a place of empathy and compassion. And then be prepared, no different than going to an airport to fly somewhere or driving in my car, pack your patience, right? I mean, I think you have to come into settings where you're working with the public always, no different in the church, with just having, pray for the patients. Christ will give you that peace, his peace, and just allow yourselves to learn and offer some tools and tips, which is hopefully what I'm going to help you acquire some more today, so that it'll make that situation for you joyful. I've always said, if it's not joyful for everybody involved, then some tweaking needs done, because catechesis and evangelization should be joyful for everybody involved.
And I think part of the orientation, if you will, to this ministry is, again, language and just understanding it. And so would you mind if walking us through maybe some common diagnoses that people in this ministry working with diverse learners would encounter, and just share a little bit about those diagnoses?
Sure. As I mentioned, autism in particular and ADHD, those are, in the umbrella of neurodiversity, so neurodevelopmental disorders. Autism is probably the most, again, commonly seen one right now in our educational settings. They typically have social skills, maybe poorer, lower, lacking, more so with someone with autism than someone else. So that they struggle in the area sometimes of social interaction, verbal and nonverbal, both, especially in processing, how they're taking it in, and their own expressive abilities to communicate can be challenging, for themselves and sometimes for someone if you're not familiar yet. So again, the patience to give them time to respond, to process what they're hearing, and to give back their response to us. So those can be areas that are, again, we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying, in the sense of not everyone, again, it's not a broad generalization we can make, but there's some characteristics sometimes of someone who have a neurodevelopmental disorder by the name of autism. Mm-hmm. They may be very repetitive. They may, because of their sensory processing, brings in so many sensory inputs without being able to filter things out. It all comes in at once, and generally at a very intensified levels. So the sights, the sounds, etc. The touch, which is why they may be much prefer less contact, be it eye, physical, etc. So just be aware of that, because to do otherwise to someone will increase their anxiety.
You may have touched on this, but what's the difference between learning styles and diverse learners?
Right. Well, learning styles is really just how someone likes to approach learning. Okay, so that's a learning style. So typically we talk about visual, auditory, or tactile kinesthetic, and meaning that last one just means hands-on. Mm-hmm. So think of yourself if someone wanted to teach you something on the computer. Some people will read a manual. Some people will never read the manual. That would be me. And I would rather just someone either tell me how to do something, but more importantly, I want to put my hands and just do it myself. So there's just those different learning styles. We might all use each of them, but every one of us probably has a preferred style.
Mm-hmm.
So, and especially for persons, I would say on the autism spectrum, that is typically visual first and foremost. And then of course, I would say tactile kinesthetic. So to just stand and talk and teach by reading to someone, or too much just auditory, they're not going to get a lot of what the message you're trying to convey. Okay. So you really need to teach in a multisensory approach. That's the one thing. The diverse learners, so that's learning style, but diverse learner is really just the varying ways that, in distinct ways that someone might respond, just physically, emotionally, behavioral. So that's now the person. You're talking more about the actual individual person. Mm-hmm. And they may require adaptations or modifications, again, to be successfully included in our retreat, church, mass, everything, not just, in the classroom.
And for those just joining us, thank you, Charleen. For those just joining us, we're with Charleen Katra, Director of the NCPD, talking with us about catechizing diverse learners. We are making our way through some defining of terms and understanding language, and we're just forming a little base here. And then we're moving into more practical applications. So I am keeping track of your questions. I do have them written down. When we get to our next engagement break, which is not too far away, I'll make sure to voice those. So thank you very much for all the traffic on the chat.
So let's talk about instruction. I know that that's a big question. I get that question often. I know Deacon Matt does too. Is there a difference between adapting a lesson and designing a lesson for diverse learners?
Well, I would say yes, in the sense is, if you're adapting a lesson, again, Sadler has dropped a curriculum, on you, and you've got this book and it's great. And it's got all these tips and tools and all the lesson in front of you, but you can certainly read any lesson and say, oh, you may have a light bulb moment. Maybe it's talking about a scripture story where Jesus is knocking on the door. Well, to make a lesson more multi-sensory approach, you use the term, it's the same thing you mentioned earlier in our beginning of our session, blended learning. So when you're doing blended learning or a multi-sensory approach of teaching and teaching styles, you may want to go over to that door and open that door and close that door. Mm-hmm. Just any little thing you do kind of adapts the lesson and maybe makes it more appreciated by one learner or another. And usually what's good for one or two learners is really good for everybody. It gets attention, it's engagement, there's a sight or a sound beyond just, again, that spoken word. And again, you think about, and then the other side of what you asked me, so that's kind of, to me, that's kind of like retrofitting. You've given me the lesson, but I've got another couple ideas. And every one of us would think of different things when we read a lesson, whether there's already information provided, or again, it may, I say, inspire you. You may have another epiphany or two on your own about some other ways to make that lesson more engaging. That's a kind of a retrofit because you've been given the lesson. Now, if you're starting from scratch and you're going to write a lesson, or even if you're looking at an outline and you're writing it, I have always said to people, try to include all five senses. Try to write a lesson that includes all five senses, because it's a challenge to get to that. It's not always that easy to do, but yet sometimes it can be. And if you're intentionally trying to put five senses into a lesson, you more likely than not will typically get 3 or 4 of them. Right. So right. You may not get 5 every time, total home run on that, but sometimes you might. But it's still, it'll probably be a more engaging and lively lesson if you start that way.
And thank you for the comment about the view. Yes, we're making sure that we're getting that figured out. If you're still seeing just a name and not the face, we're taking care of that. I wanted to go to something you just said, Charleen, which was like an epiphany for me, and you'll be like, well, duh, but it was kind of an epiphany for me. So the 5 senses, writing the lesson, trying to reach or touch the 5 senses. It's almost like a liturgical model for lesson planning, because our liturgy does just that. It tries to engage all the senses, and we've talked about the liturgy being the principal way to catechize, and I just thought, wow, there's a wonderful connection there. So
sure. I mean, just think of church. I mean, even when you think of, you're teaching a lesson, but the church is so rich in these things, like you say. I mean, and when you ask people, well, what do you smell? Even if you think of just church, well, you may smell flowers on the altar. You may certainly smell incense in a church at any given time. The candle burning as you're lighting candles. I mean, there's smells that are just almost, innate to church. So, I mean, as much as you can lean into some of those things, that's makes it easy. Obviously, taste, clearly unconsecrated hosts, especially if you're preparing for Eucharist, is ideal and should be
Right.
being done.
Right.
Now, for a diverse learner, you may need to only use a very small chip of that unconsecrated host.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be able to tolerate the size of a full host, but just those, again, those little changes to help them be successfully prepared and celebrate. But we have those things.
So we've got a bunch of practitioners with us who really want to get into some of these practical tips and ideas for catechizing diverse learners. So let me just give you some buckets to consider, Charleen, as you respond, and just kind of give us your sense of, here are some great guidelines for catechesis with diverse learners. So maybe one bucket would be attitude, supplies or space, training, certification, and providing some kind of accommodation. So with those buckets, what do you have to say about practical things catechizing diverse learners?
I think attitude is very important, because I always say it's easier to remove a physical barrier at a campus than it is an attitudinal one, unfortunately. So this is a big deal, because again, as I said, it really does, it determines how you're going to respond to someone, what kind of stance you're in attitudinally.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what I would hope is that in this day and age, that when we look at someone who's different than us, we really seek to see their gifts, their God-given gifts, because we all have them. They're all wrapped differently, but we all have them. So what are someone's gifts, first of all? What do I need from them? Sometimes we think about we're doing something for someone else, and truth be told, and in this ministry, it's said over and over again by people that get involved with persons with disabilities and their families. You receive so much more. So again, if we can start thinking about things like that, and I always say, and remembering that we're the other to somebody else always, right? That someone that's different than us. We are the other too. So that's one thing. And then with that attitudinal change, I think comes as I started mentioning earlier, I often hear people, they'll say to me, well, they'll use terms like deal with.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how to deal with something. When I hear that, again, inside, I don't know, I smile or I cry, but it tells me it's an opportunity to talk about attitude, because again, it's that shift of, no, we want to talk about how do we respond to something? What are you observing? Tell me what you're observing. Don't judge it. Just tell me what's the observation, especially when you're talking to parents. For a catechist talking to a parent who is, has a lot on their plate. All parents do, but parents who have a loved one with a disability or a diagnosis have even more. So to have that, again, that compassion and understanding and realization that the best thing you may be able to do for them is to just be patient and listen. Mm-hmm. Just listen to what they say. I had a parent once say to me, I know we can be aggressive. I know we can be demanding. I know we can love us anyway. Mm-hmm. Part of their reality is they may be fighting for services in public schools or in doctor's offices and et cetera, movie theaters. They have to fight so much sometimes for accommodations and access that they're just they live in that stance. Again, not for me to judge that, for me to almost really embrace that for them, again, in a true accompaniment. And in doing so, then I change even my language. We talked about language. So it's still a matter of just shifting a mindset, and more importantly, maybe a heart set, if you could say it that way. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing I'd start by talking about. When you want to start drilling down now, once we get past and we have a good attitude and we are open and we're trying to be very inclusive to the people that God puts in front of us. Mm-hmm. Because if we don't, they're going down the street to another church. I can tell you that for a fact, because I hear it and see it far too often. So if in all denominations, and I've said this for years, are trying to learn how to better serve the disability community, of course. So it's not that one is really, it's not like a race or anything like that, but what we as Catholic Church want to know is that we're doing our best and continuing to try to open those doors, and more importantly, the hearts of the people inside, which the documents even use almost that language. So they want the doors of the church open to people with disabilities, and they want the hearts of the people inside also open. So now that we do all that, then what are some strategies? I would start by saying a best practice is a buddy system. Some people who have maybe some greater needs, whether it's inability to stay seated or stay focused or et cetera, whatever those greater needs are, having a buddy, and it can be an older, maybe sometimes it's an older youth at a parish that might be able, and they should be invited to serve in this ministry. just like any other ministry while they're maturing in their faith journey. So this should be a ministry to choose from as well, for them to serve as a buddy, for someone to be successfully included in their faith formation class or retreat or mass. And then I would say, and not to lose sight that peer mentoring can work very well too. So you could have just someone in the same class, because on the other side of someone who might need some assistance is you have someone who might be, the other category, gifted and talented. So they can do their work, they can do it well, they can be done in half the time needed than is, allotted. That's an ideal person that could, if they elect to, and if they're invited, to serve possibly as even a peer mentor for someone, peer buddy. That is a very best practice, certainly used in public schools, no different for us in the church community. Other things are, just flexible seating. Sometimes we expect everybody to be able to sit in a hard chair for an hour or something. Some can and some cannot do that so successfully. So an easy fit on that is, just bring in some other seating options if you're able to, whether there's a yoga ball or there's a beanbag chair, or there's just some soft cushions that could be put on a seat, even if it's just a regular chair, folding chair, or a hard desk. There's things called bouncy bands that you can actually put in front of someone under their feet on the front of chairs and desks, where they're allows them to stay seated, but yet they still have movement in their legs, pushing on this hard rubber band that's attached between the two legs of the chair. Again, movement's good for the brain. So anytime you can allow people to move, they can think better, they can attend better. And even if they need to get up and walk around, which is very common, and honestly, sometimes persons on the autism spectrum really do need to move. And if you allow them and not find that as a hindrance to your teaching, or don't take that personal, they just need, truth be told, I've always said, truth be told, if they could, for some that maybe are not verbal, like maybe I am right now, they could probably give back what a catechist said verbatim, because they're so focused and so attentive on what is being said, and they are capturing it. Sometimes maybe more so than the person that gives you direct eye contact the whole time you're talking to them or teaching them. So just keeping that in mind. We talk about fidgets. Fidgets is a big word and a big tool in this part of disability ministry. Fidgets are usually, and I've got one here in front of me, fidgets are usually something small and quiet that someone can individually use and hold. Again, hence to fidget with, right? So this is just one that sits on my desk all the time. Giving something like this to someone when they're having trouble focusing can make a world of difference. So start a collection of things like fidgets. You can look them up, you can read about them in my book and many other places, but that's a nice tool. And honestly, you really should have a small collection of things like that, because different people will be attracted to or need different things. So if you have a collection of a variety of different things, like even in one corner of the room, we talk about having like a calming space. You could have that in the corner of the room. I used to like to also even kind of refer to it as a Christ corner, again, being Christ to others, just have some things available there, some manipulatives and fidgets that they might seek out. It would be helpful. And I joke, but I'm serious too. Sometimes, the catechist might need to go use that Christ corner or that calming area, right? Yes. So it's good for, again, what some might need is really good for everybody typically.
Right.
So.
Those are wonderful strategies. Thank you so much for sharing those with us today, Charleen. We're going to get into these questions. I want to make sure we address a few of them. If you do not get a question answered today, do check out NCPD at ncpd.org. Go ahead and send your question there. Let them know you were part of this webinar. I'm sure Charleen and her staff will get back to you. So let's give you a chance just for a quick shout out for your upcoming conference, and then I'd like to get to the questions we have. So why don't you tell us a little bit about One Lord, One Faith, One Family?
Right. And the end of that is Disability Ministry in a Synodal Church is the full conference title. So that's happening just in about 2 weeks down in it's the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, and one of their parishes, St. Ignatius of Loyola Catholic Church in Spring, Texas. And that's on October 21st and 22nd. So we have obviously in-person, Bishop Brendan Cahill will be a keynote address. Dr. Joseph White will be a keynote address, and about I don't know, maybe 20 or more other speakers on a variety of sessions. So we have also in person again, and there is a virtual registration component as well. So if someone wanted to attend virtually, it's not obviously the full conference, but there is also that on this website that they can look at and see everything. So we've been blessed recently with some scholarship monies. So I think our scholarship app may show that that deadline had passed, but I'm just saying to this audience that if someone still wanted to apply for a scholarship, yeah, there it shows it extended, they can still do so. And we'll keep an eye on that every day as well.